Outside the fogged glass window, on a late autumn morning, the city of Portland seemed to be waking up slowly. The trees lining the avenue were tinged golden, rustling occasionally in the crisp breeze, reflected through the windshield of an old pickup truck parked quietly in the corner of the lot. Ethan Blake sat behind the wheel, his hand slowly adjusting a faded baseball cap, pulling it down a little to cast a shadow over his eyes. The cleverly applied fake beard made his sharp features appear rougher, older than his 45 years. His canvas jacket and worn heels on his shoes made him look like an ordinary man, someone who might stop by here to apply for a dishwasher or waiter job, rather than the founder and CEO of Harbor Table, a family restaurant chain spread across the Pacific Northwest. The branch before him, number 8, had once been a point of pride for the brand, located right at the entrance of the southern suburbs, where customer flow was steady, the community close, knit, and weekends were often fully booked. Yet, for many months, internal reports showed steady profits, while emails from customers and anonymous messages from staff painted a different picture. Food quality was slipping, service had become curt, and the working atmosphere felt heavier than ever. Ethan was all too familiar with the disconnect between the numbers on paper and the real story. He understood that to reach the truth, one could not rely solely on reports or regional managers' accounts. One had to step in, blend into the daily rhythm, see with one's own eyes, hear firsthand, and most importantly, feel with one's own intuition. He took a deep breath, opened the car door, and stepped onto the slightly damp concrete. The lingering scent of last night's rain mingled with the faint aroma of coffee drifting from somewhere nearby. Step by step, he approached the glass door of Harbor Table, where the earliest memories of his career suddenly surged forth. Over 20 years ago, he had stood in a tiny kitchen before a greasy stainless steel sink, washing each pan and wiping every cutting board with his own hands. There was no investment other than hard work and a fierce belief that if every dish was served with kindness, customers would notice and return. From 3 small restaurants, Ethan expanded to 18 branches, and over time, he moved away from the kitchen to focus on broader strategies. He knew that distance was a double-edged sword. Inside, the sound of cutlery clinking, sizzling from the kitchen, and hurried footsteps scraping against wooden floors filled the air. The smell of grilled meat blended with the scent of old fried potatoes drifting through the space. At the reception desk, a young woman forced a smile, her eyes briefly flickering with fatigue as she handed menus to customers. Ethan nodded gently, moving deeper inside, his gaze scanning each table. A soup placed before a guest was slightly greasy, the garnish wilted, and the toasted bread slice nearly burnt. Toward the back, near the open kitchen counter, he spotted a man around 50 with a broad frame and a voice sharp as a command. Harvey Dunn, the branch manager, was pointing at a female employee, limping slightly, seemingly about to say something but then fell silent. Ethan couldn't catch the exact words, but the employee's eyes showed a mix of endurance and helplessness. He slowed his pace, found a corner table by the window, sat down, and quietly observed. At this moment, his role as CEO receded into the background. He was not here to intervene immediately, but to absorb every small detail, from how employees chatted among themselves, to their attitude toward customers, to the signs of fatigue hidden behind forced smiles. Every action, every glance was a piece of the larger picture he needed to piece together. And amid the noisy chaos of a noon approaching its busy hour, Ethan realized one thing. The truth rarely makes a loud entrance. It hides in small moments where neglect or dedication naturally reveal themselves. Outside the fogged glass on a late autumn morning, the sky was grey, and a chill seeped through every crack. But inside the diner, the air was thick with the scent of oil that had been through countless rounds of frying. Ethan leaned lightly against a chair, his hand slowly swirling a glass of water, still dotted with a few ice cubes, his eyes following every movement around him. At the service counter, Harvey Dunn stood with the air of a superior, his voice not loud but sharp enough to cut through the surrounding conversations. He gestured to a young employee carrying a tray, then shook his head coldly when the employee hesitated with a question. That brief exchange left a heavy impression. A group of customers entered, 2 adults and a boy of about 10, their clothes still speckled with mud, as if they had just come from the ball field. They smiled politely, but the smile quickly faded when the waitress greeted them with a formal hello and glanced at the wall clock as if reminding herself it was rush hour. Ethan clearly noticed the lack of warmth, not because the customers had done anything wrong, but because the staff seemed mentally pulled away from their work. He tilted his head and glanced toward the open kitchen. A slender female employee with tied back hair was limping between the 2 rows of stoves, one hand carrying a tray, the other gently supporting her knee. No one asked or offered help. Harvey, instead of noticing her condition, was focused on inspecting the meat being sliced, grimacing at an unsatisfactory cut. His voice rang out cold and firm. "Do it again. Don't waste the food." The order sounded like a military command, completely ignoring the human element. Ethan received his meal from another waiter. The plate of grilled salmon was placed before him, the sauce already separating oil, the boiled vegetables slightly soggy. He cut a small piece with his fork. The taste was bland with a pungent note of ingredients past their freshness. He set down the fork, not out of disappointment over flavor, but because each detail confirmed what he had suspected. The standards that had once been the foundation of Harbor Table were being neglected. He recalled the early days when he personally tested every batch of sauce, seasoning it perfectly before serving. Back then, he believed in the power of meticulous care, that customers could feel the affection and responsibility poured into the food. Now, sitting in a space once a source of pride, he saw clear signs of disconnection, where people merely went through the motions. Ethan continued observing, noticing a young busboy standing near the dishwashing area, occasionally rubbing his stomach. He whispered something to Harvey, but immediately received a dismissive wave and a glare. "No breaks during shifts. If you want one, find another job," Harvey snapped harshly. The boy lowered his head, returning to work, his thin shoulders seeming to slump even further. The noise of dishes clattering filled the diner, yet moments like these brought a hush. Ethan knew these small signs were the markers of a workplace culture rotting from within, where fear overshadowed pride, and silence became a means of survival. He exhaled softly, feeling a heavy burden settle on his shoulders. It was time not just to observe, but to find a way deeper into this machine, to uncover what was truly draining the soul from Harbor Table, the very thing that once made it unique. The next morning, Portland was still shrouded in mist, and the dampness left by a light rain overnight. Ethan arrived earlier than any of the staff, his old pickup truck parked at the far end of the lot, like any other worker's vehicle for the opening shift. He wore a faded black T-shirt printed with the Harbour Table logo, grey kitchen pants, and brand new slip-resistant shoes. A simple plastic name tag clipped to his left chest read Evan, a temporary name just enough to avoid drawing attention. He entered through the back door, reserved for employees, inhaling the mixed aroma of freshly brewed coffee, newly baked bread, and the moist air escaping from a just-opened cooler. Harvey was not yet there. Only a few staff were preparing for the morning shift, glancing quickly at Ethan before returning to their work. No one asked many questions, because in this environment, new faces were common, and the fewer greetings exchanged, the easier it was to blend into the daily flow. Marcus, the sous chef, a tanned man with strong arms and knife skills as fast as a machine, pointed toward a thawing chicken box. "Skin off, trim fat. Leave the meat," he said curtly, eyes fixed on his knife. Ethan nodded and silently followed the instruction. Though the rubber gloves were cumbersome, he worked skillfully, each motion neat enough to earn a brief glance from Marcus, who then looked away. The morning kitchen operated like a machine, but one that hadn't been oiled in a long time. A petite waitress with hair tied high limped past, carrying a tray of drinks. No knee brace, no support, just a noticeably tilted step. Ethan leaned toward Marcus, lowering his voice. "What's wrong with her?" Marcus didn't look up. "Injury from before. Harvey said if she can stand, she has to work." The blunt reply weighed heavily on Ethan's chest, like swallowing a cold stone. As he sliced the meat, the back door suddenly opened. Harvey entered, his white shirt slightly wrinkled, clutching a notebook and checklist. His eyes scanned the kitchen quickly, then settled on the meat section. "Remember to leave the skin for the soup tonight," Harvey ordered decisively, indifferent to the fact the skin had already been discarded per hygiene standards. When Marcus gently mentioned the skin, showed signs of spoilage. Harvey just raised his eyebrows. "Customers won't notice. Don't waste ingredients." Ethan kept his head down, but every word struck like a red flag on a list of violations. He continued working, silently observing. Wilted vegetables, soaked in ice water to revive freshness. Yesterday's half. Used meat trays mixed into the new batch, and everyone moving in the rhythm of a deeply ingrained habit, a habit of ignoring standards that had once been the soul of this brand. He knew that to truly understand, he had to spend the whole day feeling the fatigue, pressure, and resignation permeating this place. Only by standing in their shoes could he see clearly the links that had long since rotted away. And that morning, Ethan officially stepped into that role, not as a leader, but as an anonymous cog in the machine. By noon, the restaurant was stretched tight like a taut string. The cash register's continuous clattering mixed with the sounds of knives and chopping boards, while the smell of hot oil thickened the kitchen air. Ethan stood in a corner of the prep area, continuously stirring a tray of sautéed vegetables, his eyes still watching everything around him. Cliff Moran, the shift supervisor, appeared near the bar, clipboard tucked under his arm like a symbol of authority. He didn't touch any tools but circled the kitchen, tapping his pen lightly on the board whenever something displeased him. In the service area, the petite waitress from the morning still limped as she carried a tray to a table by the window. Ethan noticed her hesitate slightly as she paused, her hand gripping the tray as if trying to keep balance. Cliff approached, without a word of concern, speaking loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "If you keep standing there doing nothing, The customers will think you're slow. Move faster." His tone wasn't harsh, but that cold indifference made his words heavy. Harvey from the main kitchen glanced over, catching Ethan's eye before shifting his gaze to the girl. "I told you, if you can stand, you can work. If you can't handle it, then quit." No one replied. The girl pursed her lips and moved on, her shoes sliding lightly across the wet floor. Ethan saw clearly it wasn't that she didn't want to respond, but here, silence was a way to survive. A 17-year-old busboy quietly asked Cliff while carrying a tray, "Hey, can I eat quickly? I haven't had." Before he could finish, Cliff cut him off. "No breaks during shifts. Finish with customers first." The reply was tossed out like a routine, without even a glance. The boy lowered his head, returned to work, his shoulders slumped, hands gripping the tray tightly. Ethan finished turning the vegetables just as Marcus, the sous chef, took a tray of pork from the fridge. The sauce on top had dried, and the exposed cut showed raw-looking meat. Marcus glanced at Ethan, then Harvey. "Set this aside. Throw it out tonight." Harvey stepped over, opened the tray lid, a sour smell rising, but he only nodded slightly. "Add more sauce. Slice thin. The customers won't know." His calm voice sounded like issuing a normal business order. Ethan said nothing. He knew that at this point, any impulsive reaction would expose him too soon. But the scenes unfolding were etched clearly in his memory, along with names, times, and tones of voice. These were no longer minor mistakes. This was a system accustomed to operating by ignoring standards, oppressing the vulnerable, and calculating short-term gains regardless of long-term consequences. He bent down to continue his work, letting the sizzling of the vegetable pan mask his deeper-than-usual breaths. The longer he stayed, the more he felt the urgency of facing and correcting the root problems. But before doing so, he needed a few more pieces to complete the picture, and he knew the evening shift would give him what he needed. The evening shift began as the light outside the window turned amber, casting long shadows across the floor, darkened by grease and footprints. Though there were fewer customers than during the busy lunch hour, the pace in the kitchen remained steady, with fatigue more apparent on every face. Ethan maintained the slow, deliberate movements of a newcomer, enough to avoid drawing attention, but still able to observe closely. Marcus paused while cutting a slab of beef, scraping off the discolored surface with a knife, glancing at Harvey for a reaction. Harvey didn't look at Marcus, simply tossing back, "As long as it's still red inside. Add some sauce. No one will complain." Ethan caught every word. That tone wasn't a suggestion, but a repeated command, ingrained as habit. Near the service counter, Cliff reviewed the evening staff roster. Ethan noticed several names appearing for 4 or 5 consecutive days without a break, interspersed with others crossed out or left blank. He also caught the glance of a new girl studying the schedule before lowering her head and silently continuing to wipe tables. Here, the schedule wasn't about fair distribution, but about rotating people to please management. Toward the end of the shift, a box of lettuce was brought out of the cold storage. Upon opening, the outer leaves were yellowed and limp at the edges. Instead of discarding them, Cliff ordered, "Pick out the bad parts, soak them in ice water, then put them on the salad bar later. Customers only look at the green." No one objected. The hands picking lettuce moved swiftly as if this task were as routine as slicing bread. Ethan carried the tray of sautéed vegetables to the counter, his eyes still tracking every small action that he had only heard about through reports while sitting in the office. Now each detail came alive with the bitter sting of direct witness. He realized that what was draining Harbor Table of its soul wasn't one big mistake, but countless small concessions repeated daily, seeping deeply into the work culture. As the clock neared 9 p.m., Harvey stepped out of the office, clapped twice to signal the end of the shift. His voice rang out, "Anyone free? Clean the outside area. Tips will be shared tomorrow." Ethan saw Marcus briefly smirk but say nothing. He understood the meaning. Tips were never shared evenly, and anyone who complained risked having their name vanish from the next week's schedule. Ethan hung his apron on the hook, feeling the chill of sweat on his back. Today he had gathered enough pieces to confirm that the problem was no longer a rumor, but he wasn't ready to act yet. Tomorrow he would return, not to continue pretending to learn, but to begin the process of confronting it. And this time, he wouldn't come alone. The next morning, the sky over Portland was clearer, but a different heaviness stirred in Ethan's heart. He stepped out of the pickup truck with a completely different demeanor. A crisp white shirt buttoned up to the collar, dark dress pants, polished leather shoes, and a neatly clipped name tag at his waist reading Ethan Blake, founder and CEO. No hat, no fake beard, and none of the sluggish posture of a new employee. He entered through the front door, letting the morning light illuminate his face, so everyone could clearly see who he was. At the counter, Lena Torres paused her instruction to a new employee, arranging salad trays when she caught Ethan's eye, then nodded slightly as if understanding something. Marcus in the kitchen also stopped his work, a flicker of relief crossing his gaze. At the far end of the room, Harvey Dunn stepped out of the office, clipboard in hand. His expression shifted from surprise to guarded as Ethan approached. "In 10 minutes, I need all staff to be in the break room," Ethan said, his voice not loud but enough to halt everyone's tasks. Harvey frowned. "What's going on? We're preparing for the rush." Ethan held his gaze steady. "Exactly. And we'll be better prepared after we talk." 10 minutes later, the break room was packed. Plastic chairs were pushed close to the walls. Some leaned against stainless steel shelves, all silently waiting. Ethan stood among them without notes or papers. "I spent 2 days working alongside you," he began slowly but firmly. "Not from an office, but in the kitchen, at the service counter, and in the overlooked corners, and I saw more than I expected." Harvey opened his mouth, but Ethan raised a hand to stop him. "I saw employees forced to work while injured. I saw old ingredients reused, wilted vegetables soaked to freshen up, spoiled meat covered in sauce. I saw overlapping shifts, unclear tip distribution, and silence when someone needed help." He paused, all eyes fixed on him. "None of that is the Harbor Table I built." Silence fell, broken only by soft breaths. Ethan turned to Harvey. "You're fired, effective immediately." Harvey raised an eyebrow, letting out a short laugh. "You can't." "I can," Ethan interrupted, his tone unchanged. "And I just did." His gaze shifted to Cliff. "You're suspended pending a full investigation of your shifts and scheduling decisions." Cliff pursed his lips, said nothing, and lowered his eyes. Ethan scanned the room. Naomi, Marcus, You two will temporarily manage the kitchen and service area. Starting today, we reset the standards. Schedules will be rewritten, tips will be shared fairly, and ingredients will meet the standards we set on opening day." Slow nods appeared across the crowd. No applause, but the atmosphere lightened, shoulders relaxed. Ethan knew this moment was just the beginning. But at least the message was clear. Silence would no longer be tolerated, and standards would return right here. 3 weeks later, the work schedule posted in the break room looked completely different. The previously messy, empty slots had been replaced with evenly distributed shifts and reasonable days off. No more names crossed out or appearing for 4 or 5 consecutive days. Ethan leaned against the window frame, watching Lena and Marcus quietly but confidently review the staff list for the upcoming week. The kitchen felt brighter now, not only because of new lighting, but because every hidden corner had been thoroughly cleaned. The lunch salad bar was filled with crisp, fresh greens prepared just before opening. There was no longer any picking out bad leaves to deceive customers. Any substandard ingredients were immediately discarded. Marcus had rewritten the kitchen handbook, posting new standards boldly on the stainless steel walls, with the header, "If you wouldn't eat it, don't serve it." Ethan chose to step back, letting these changes take root naturally from within. He saw Lena bending down to talk with a new employee, showing how to set tables before the rush, then nodding approvingly when the task was done right. At the dishwashing station, the young busboy who had been denied a break was now washing trays, his hands still wet but no longer cracked, thanks to the new gloves provided. Regular customers began returning. An elderly woman with silver hair stopped by, just to tell Lena, "Everything looks much better," before ordering her usual meal. No signs announcing "we've changed" were needed. The transformation was evident in how people moved, spoke, and in their more direct, no longer evasive glances. Ethan stepped outside, inhaling deeply the scent of freshly roasted coffee and sweet pastry dough from the oven. He knew the process wasn't complete. There would be challenges ahead, times when standards would be tested by revenue pressures or old habits. But for now, at least, everyone had witnessed a truly functioning model. And from here, they would be the ones to keep this harbor table branch from slipping back down the old path. He returned to his truck without anyone seeing him off or thanking him. His role was not to receive praise, but to ensure that when he came back someday, this atmosphere would still remain, the kind that can't be recorded in reports, but stands as the clearest proof of revival. One rainy afternoon, Ethan returned to branch number 8, this time without announcement, without a name tag, and carrying no official role. He wore a dark jacket, jeans and sneakers, blending in with the scattered customers, seeking shelter from the rain. The glass door slid open, and a warm breeze mixed with the aroma of grilled dishes immediately greeted him. The restaurant was noticeably brighter than the first time he stepped inside. Lively conversations filled the tables near the window, mingling with the clatter of dishes from the kitchen area. Lena stood behind the service counter, smiling as she greeted customers, her hands skillfully pouring coffee. Marcus was in the open kitchen, carefully slicing beef with precise cuts, setting the pieces aside as if to inspect them one last time before cooking. Ethan chose a corner table from which he could see both the counter and the kitchen. A young server approached with a menu, greeting confidently and naturally. When Ethan ordered a salad with salmon, the server nodded, quickly jotting it down and mentioning he would alert the kitchen immediately, because freshly grilled salmon tastes best. That single sentence revealed a pride in his voice, something Ethan had rarely noticed before in the waitstaff. Shortly after, the salad plate was placed before him. Crisp, vibrant green leaves, golden salmon pieces, topped with just enough sauce without spilling over. He took a bite. The fresh flavor made him nod slightly. This was more than a quality dish. It was proof of a strictly followed process. At the counter, Lena chatted with a family who had just finished their meal. The mother said something that made Lena laugh before bending down to thank a child for returning a dropped spoon. Marcus glanced over, caught Ethan's eye, and gave a slight nod. Not a public greeting, but a subtle sign that things were still on track. Ethan stayed a few more minutes, sipping coffee while listening to the steady patter of rain outside. When he stood to leave, he didn't look for anyone to announce his departure or leave instructions. The door closed quietly behind him as he stepped out into the rain with a light heart. This time, he was not leaving behind a heap of problems to solve, but a restaurant that had found its true rhythm once again. Looking back on the entire journey at branch number 8, what remains is not just improved numbers or reports, but a lesson about the true nature of corporate culture. From the perspective of someone who has managed and restructured many service systems, I believe standards cannot be maintained by slogans or rules hung on walls. They must be lived through every small action each day. When the right behaviors are reinforced and spread, they become habits, then the most sustainable foundation for a brand. If you believe that any organization can find its heartbeat again when leaders are willing to step down and engage with reality, please leave a like and subscribe to continue joining us in stories of brand revival and the awakening of human values. And before you leave this video, drop a comment with the phrase, "Keep the standard," as a pledge that good standards will always be protected, wherever they may be.